Welcome to German History with a German accent. My name is Wolf, W-O-L-F, just like the animal. And in this video I'm speaking about Fedor von Bock. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel. Moritz Albrecht Franz Friedrich Fedor von Bock was born on December 3rd, 1880 in Küstrin. His father, Moritz Albert Karl von Bock, had commanded a division in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870-1871. His mother, Olga Helene Franziska von Falkenhayn, was the sister of the chief of the German General Staff during the First World War. At the age of 8, Bock went to study at a military academy in Berlin. The education emphasized Prussian militarism, and he quickly became adept in academic subjects such as modern languages, mathematics, and history. At an early age, and largely due to his father, von Bock developed an unquestioning loyalty to the state and dedication to the military profession. In 1905, Bock married Marie von Reichenbach, a young Prussian noblewoman. They had a daughter. In 1908, Bock entered the War Academy in Berlin, and after a year's study, he joined the ranks of the General Staff. He soon joined the Army League and came to know Walter von Brauchitsch, Franz Halder, and Gerd von Rundstedt. By the time World War I began in 1914, Bock was a captain. He served as a battalion commander in January and February 1916. He was decorated with the Pour le Mérite, German Empire's highest military decoration at that time. After World War I, von Bock stayed on as an officer in the German military and rose through the ranks. In the 1920s, Bock was together with Kurt von Schleicher, Eugen Ott, and Kurt von Hammerstein-Equar, a member of a secret group known as Sondergruppe R, selected by and responsible to Hans von Seeckt, who were in charge of helping Germany evade the Part 5 of the Treaty of Versailles, which had disarmed Germany. The officers of Sondergruppe R formed the liaison with Major Bruno Ernst Buchrucker, who led the so-called Work Commandos, which was officially a labor group intended to assist with civilian projects, but were in reality thinly disguised soldiers that allowed Germany to exceed the limits on troops' strengths set by Versailles. Buchrucker's so-called Black Reichswehr became infamous for its practice of murdering all those Germans who were suspected of working as informers for the Allied Control Commission, which was responsible for ensuring that Germany was in compliance with Part 5 of the Treaty of Versailles. The killings perpetrated by the Black Reichswehr were justified under the secret court system. These killings were ordered by officers from Sondergruppe R. On September 27, 1923, Buchrucker ordered 4,500 men of the Black Reichswehr to assemble outside of Berlin as the first preparatory step toward a coup. Bock, who was Buchrucker's contact with the Reichswehr, was enraged, and in a stormy meeting berated Buchrucker for mobilizing the Black Reichswehr without orders. Fedor von Bock stated that the Reichswehr wanted no part in Buchrucker's coup. Despite Bock's orders to demobilize at once, Buchrucker went ahead with his coup on September 30th, 1923, which ended in a total failure. In 1935, Adolf Hitler appointed Bock as commander of the Third Army Group. Von Bock was one of the officers not removed from his position when Hitler reorganized armed forces during the phase of German rearmament before the outbreak of the Second World War. He remained a monarchist. Hitler reportedly said of him, "Nobody in the world but von Bock can teach soldiers to die." In 1936, Fedor von Bock married Wilhelmine née von Bock. Von Bock commanded the invasion of Vienna in March 1938 for the Anschluss, and then the invasion of Czechoslovakia. By August 25, 1939, Fedor von Bock was in command of Army Group North in preparation for the invasion and the conquest of Poland. The objective for Army Group North was to destroy Polish forces north of the Vistula. Army Group North was composed of General Georg von Kücher's 3rd Army and General Günther von Kluge's 4th Army. These struck southward from East Prussia and eastward across the base of the Polish corridor, respectively. On September 10th, Bock ordered the forces under his command to burn Polish villages located behind the front line to the ground if they were fired up on from the settlement and if it proves impossible to identify the house from which the shots came. By October 26, 1939, 531 towns and villages had been destroyed across Poland. In 5 weeks, Poland was overrun by German and Soviet forces. Shortly after the conquest of Poland, on October 12, 1939, Fedor von Bock was given command of Army Group B with 29.5 divisions, including 3 armored divisions. These were tasked with advancing through the Low Countries and luring the northern units of the Allied armies into a pocket. Army Group B consisted of the 18th and the 6th Armies. On July 19, 1940, von Bock was promoted to the rank of General Field Marshal. At the end of August, Army High Command transferred Army Group B to East Prussia. On February 2, 1941, Fedor von Bock met with Adolf Hitler and questioned whether the Russians could be forced to make peace even if the Red Army was brought to battle and defeated. In preparation for Operation Barbarossa, on April 1, 1941, Army Group B was redesignated as Army Group Center. Deployed in Poland, Army Group Center was one of 3 army formations which were to lead the invasion of the Soviet Union. It included the 4th and 9th Armies, the 3rd and 2nd Panzer Armies, and Luftflotte II. On the left flank of Bock's Army Group Center was Army Group North, commanded by Wilhelm Ritter von Leeb. On the right flank was Army Group South, commanded by Gerd von Rundstedt. The main objective of Army Group Center was to follow the route north of the Pripyat marshes to Moscow. Following the border battles, the task of Army Group Center was to drive towards the cities of Minsk and Smolensk and destroy the Soviet armies stationed there in encirclement battles. At 3:15 a.m. on June 22, 1941, the first shots of Operation Barbarossa were fired. Germany invaded the Soviet Union with a timed declaration of war. Elements of Heinz Guderian's force had crossed the Bock River and were bypassing the city of Brest-Litovsk. Hermann Hoth's tanks were heading for Grodno on the Niemen River to seize the important river crossings. Several recon units from the 4th and 9th Armies had already crossed the Bock and Desna rivers. The roads on the Soviet side of the Bock River were already becoming too soft to support the weight of tanks. Despite this, the first day of the invasion had been spectacularly successful. Soviet resistance was reported as being light and complete surprise was achieved. All along the front, rapid progress was being made. On the second day of Barbarossa, von Bock crossed the Bock River escorted by Major General Gustav Schmidt. Later that day, Fedor von Bock was presented with reports that Soviet resistance was stiffening all along the front, especially on Guderian's southern flank. Meanwhile, Hoth's forces were advancing with much more ease through the Baltic states and Belarus. The first 2 days of Army Group Center's advance proved to be highly successful. Hermann Hoth's army advanced so quickly that Fedor von Bock immediately contacted Walter von Brauchitsch, requesting the bypassing of Minsk in favor of attacking toward Witzbek, so that a drive could be made for Moscow. Initially, the change in plan was accepted, but it was soon overruled by Adolf Hitler, who favored the encirclement and destruction of the large Soviet armies near Minsk. Differences between Bock's strategic intent and the intent of High Command repeatedly surfaced. Fedor von Bock continued to favor a direct drive toward Moscow, bypassing Soviet armies and leaving them to be destroyed by infantry, which advanced on foot well behind tank columns. Bock argued that if encirclement were truly necessary, then instead of diverting his tanks north and south to encircle and destroy smaller Soviet armies, a larger encirclement should be made eastward toward the Dnieper river basins. Adolf Hitler decided against this plan and insisted that the pockets containing Soviet armies must be destroyed before advancing deeper into Russia. Fedor von Bock, enraged by this decision, was quoted as saying, "We are permitting our greatest chance of success to escape us by this restriction placed on our armor." He hesitantly gave the order to abandon the drive toward Witzbek and assist in the destruction of the pockets. On June 30th, the 4th and 9th armies met each other near Slonim, trapping thousands of Soviet soldiers. However, many Soviet soldiers managed to escape eastward. Bock soon gave the order to disengage from the encirclement and prepare for a full-scale drive toward the east. This order once again caused a confrontation between Fedor von Bock and Walter von Brauchitsch. On July 3rd, Bock's forces were once again advancing eastward, with Guderian's tanks crossing the Berezina and Hoth's tanks crossing the Duna. This day marked the furthest distance covered by Bock's troops in a single day, with over 100 miles traveled. On September 9th, 1941, Army High Command instructed Fedor von Bock to prepare an operational order for the assault on Moscow. Operation Typhoon was the codename given to this new attack, which was to begin no later than September 30th, 1941. Bock supervised the planning and preparation of the operation, and a few days later it was approved by the High Command. As a part of the preparation for Operation Typhoon, Army Group Center would be reinforced and replenished with men and vehicles. It would be composed of 3 infantry armies and 3 tank armies. The replenishment of Army Group Center for Operation Typhoon caused it to increase greatly in size. With almost 1.5 million soldiers, it was now larger than it was at the outset of Operation Barbarossa. Operation Typhoon began with attacks from Guderian's and Hoth's army forces. Several days later, the infantry armies began to move toward Moscow. Bock estimated that his troops would enter the city in 3 to 4 weeks. Almost immediately, Bock's forces encountered stiff Soviet resistance on the road to Moscow. On October 3rd, 1941, Guderian's forces captured Orel and subsequently gained access to a paved highway which led to Moscow, some 180 miles away. Meanwhile, elements of the 2nd Panzer Army reported that they had bypassed Bryansk and were heading toward Karachev. Bock ordered Guderian to press on toward Tula, but within hours this order had been reversed by High Command. The reversal of the order called Guderian to attack Bryansk, where, along with Basma, 2 massive encirclements of Soviet forces were occurring. Bock argued that the area between Orel and Tula remained relatively free of Soviet forces and that Tula could be captured within hours. Ultimately, Bock agreed to divert Guderian's tanks toward Bryansk. Heavy weather conditions made further advancement difficult. Virtually, the entire front became stuck. The only vehicles capable of negotiating the mud were tanks and other tracked vehicles. However, these moved at a snail's pace, sometimes as little as 2 miles per day, and fuel consumption soared. This further aggravated the problem of already poor supply lines. Slight improvements in the weather soon made it possible for Bock's forces to continue to seal the pockets around Bryansk and Wismar. The dual encirclement of Soviet forces around Wismar and Bryansk yielded some of the largest Soviet casualties since the beginning of Operation Barbarossa. Some 650,000 prisoners were taken during these two encirclements, after which the Soviet armies facing Bock's Army Group Center no longer had the advantage of superior numbers. Fedor von Bock was one of the few German officers to protest the systematic maltreatment of Soviet prisoners of war, but took few steps to improve the conditions of those being held in the areas under his command. The weather soon deteriorated again, with the roads once more turning into impassable, muddy quagmires. Since September 30th, 1941, Bock had lost some 35,000 men, 250 tanks and artillery pieces, and several hundred other vehicles, many of which were mired in the mud. Fuel and ammunition supplies became dangerously low. Despite these problems, the advance towards Moscow continued as Adolf Hitler became increasingly impatient. When advance units of the 4th Panzer Army reached Kaluga and Maloyaroslavets, German forces were within 40 miles of Moscow. Heinz Guderian's advance in the south was much slower. An attempt by his forces to capture Tula had failed, with considerable losses of men and tanks. However, other units captured Stalinogorsk and Venom, indicating the possibility of bypassing Tula. The further Bock's forces advanced, the stiffer the Soviet resistance became. The paved roads leading to Moscow became craters under constant Russian artillery fire, rendering them impassable. This forced the German troops into the mud, and Army Group Center soon became stuck once again. The goal of capturing Moscow by mid-October could no longer be achieved. However, the sheer weight of the German advance could not be fully stopped, and on October 21st, units of the 9th Army captured Kalinin. As November arrived, the mud soon turned into ice as temperature dropped to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. While the ground hardened sufficiently enough to support vehicles, the cold weather added to the miseries of the German soldiers, as many had not received their winter clothing. Frostbite soon took its toll. Many soldiers were severely affected and had to be evacuated. On November 20th, Bock moved his field quarters to an advanced forward position near the front lines. There he visited an artillery command post where he could see the buildings of Moscow through his field glasses. Several days later, German forces crossed the Moscow-Volga Canal and reached Kimiki, but soon fell back due to Soviet resistance. On November 29th, elements of the 4th Panzer Army reached the western suburbs of Moscow. On December 4th, units of the 2nd Army reached Kuntsevo, a western suburb of Moscow. Several units of Guderian's army bypassed Kolomna and reached the Moscow River. Meanwhile, the 3rd Panzer Army once again fought into Kimiki. These were the last advances made by Army Group Center under Fedor von Bock's command. On December 6th, with temperatures at minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit, fresh Russian troops commanded by Zhukov launched a huge counterattack. All along the front near Moscow, German troops retreated, destroying whatever equipment they could not salvage. Several days later, the High Command ordered a halt to all offensive operations. By December 13th, German forces had retreated more than 50 miles from the capital, and on December 18th, Fedor von Bock was relieved of his command of Army Group Center. The official pretext of this decision was health problems. However, this was just one case out of some 40 high-ranking officers being relieved of their command following the failure of capturing Moscow. Fedor von Bock was reassigned to lead Army Group South on January 20th, 1942, after the death of General Field Marshal Walter von Reichenau from a stroke. Thus, in May 1942, he commanded the defeating forces that delivered a devastating defeat to the Soviet winter offense and severely depleted Soviet tank strength in the Second Battle of Kharkov. On June 28, 1942, Fedor von Bock's offense split the Russian front into fragments on either side of Kursk. Three armies, Weich's Second Army, Holst's 4th Panzer, and Paulus' 6th Army, along with 11 panzer divisions, fed out toward Voronezh and the Don River. Paulus' armored divisions reached the Don on either side of Voronezh on July 5th. The Soviet High Command created a Voronezh front under Nikolai Vatutin, who reported directly to Moscow. Fedor von Bock wanted to eliminate Vatutin's forces before extending his own flank too deeply into the void created by the strength and speed of the German offense. Adolf Hitler was not pleased with Bock's plan to delay the push towards Stalingrad. On July 7th, 1942, Adolf Hitler split the Army Group South into Army Groups A and B. Army Group A was given to Field Marshal Wilhelm List to command. On July 17, 1942, Adolf Hitler relieved Fedor von Bock as commander of Army Group B, replacing him with Maximilian von Weichs. And Fedor von Bock never again occupied a senior command position in the war. Fedor von Bock was injured on May 3, 1945, as his car was strafed by a British fighter plane, killing his wife, stepdaughter, and a friend. Initially the only survivor of the attack, Fedor von Bock died of his injuries the following day.